Hello, everyone. Our guest today is Ben Zweig, a CEO and founder of Revelio Labs, a workforce intelligence company that allows you to understand the workforce dynamics of your company and I think overall in the industry as well. Hi, Ben.
Hey, how's it going? Nice to be here.
Thank you for coming. Could you tell us a little bit about what you do at Revelio Labs?
Yeah, sure. So we're a data company, specifically related to employment data. So we collect, curate, enrich, aggregate all the information in the world related to employment. So a lot of that exists just out there in the public domain. There's resumes and LinkedIn profiles and job postings and Glassdoor reviews and all these different sources of information, and we collect all of it. And most importantly, we standardize it. So the data itself is a mess, as you can imagine. Picture someone's resume. They write whatever they want. It's all free text, and that requires analysis to be able to get into a workflow where you can do any sort of analysis on it. So titles have to be classified to an occupation, to a seniority level. Companies have to be mapped to an entity and an industry and things like that. So we do a lot of data enrichment ultimately to get a data set that's really useful. And once it's all standardized and nice and neat, then clients can use it to understand the dynamics of any company.
Mhm.
So they can say, oh, at this company I'm tracking, maybe there's a high rate of attrition of their salespeople, and maybe that's a sign that they're not going to hit their targets. So if I'm a competitor, maybe I see an opportunity, or try to recruit them. Or if I'm an investor, maybe I'll short their stock. So there's a lot of people who want to understand companies, understand the inner workings of companies, and the best way to do that is through their workforce. That's the engine that makes a company tick.
Yeah, I was just watching a video, a documentary on Bloomberg, I think a couple of
Oh,
days ago, and the amount of data that they have access to is incredible. And I think one of the extra layers they could go into analyzing the company would be at the workforce trajectories to see really how things are going, not just from
yeah.
the public materials.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, we really try to, I think Bloomberg, the company, is one of the most impressive companies out there. I think they really brought such sophistication to the world of capital
Mm.
markets, and we really, respect the hell out of them. Like they've done a great job in just changing a whole sector of the economy and making it more sophisticated. But we in the Bloomberg terminal, which is so ubiquitous and so powerful, they actually don't have as much data as we have already, because capital markets are simpler than labor markets,
Mhm.
and the way that you can segment data and the way the flexibility that's required for financial market data is not as you don't need as much flexibility. There's a lot more rigidity around the way that financial market data can be analyzed. So I think I remember asking them recently. I think they have like 200,000 data series.
Yeah.
I don't know how to say series is, but yeah, they have something like 200,000, and they store them all as pre computed time series fields, and that's really a small fraction of what we do. There's infinite ways to slice and dice the workforce data of even a single company. Like, let's say you want to segment by occupation, and there's 1,000 occupations, and you want it over time. So there's I don't know, let's say 150 time periods, and that's already 150,000 data points. And maybe you also want it segmented by you know country, and there's 150 countries or whatever. That's already getting into the millions. Maybe you also want it segmented by I don't know, like skill, and there's 10,000 skills. This gets into the billions and trillions of observations very quickly. That's just for a single company. So the data sets can be really tremendous and massive. So just engineering this is a big effort.
How difficult it is to get an access to such large data amounts and to know how to structure them correctly to make use of it.
Yeah, I mean, they're really different questions. I mean, getting access to the data is really there's big data sourcing challenges. So there's sourcing just in terms of like actually scraping publicly accessible data. Sometimes it's very hard to scrape it. You need a lot of proxies and a lot of technology to just collect data at scale. And you have to build in systems that make sure that you're, not like losing data along the way, that you're not introducing errors, that you have consistency and all that. So there's a lot of like technology that goes into sourcing the data. Then there's also like anti-bot protections. Sometimes companies make it very difficult to scrape their data, and that is something that they do. They make it hard or make it expensive, and it's a cat and mouse game where you try to get it in as efficient way
Because
as
they want to
possible.
sell the data and not just provide it for free, maybe.
Sometimes, or maybe they want to gatekeep it. So in the case with LinkedIn, it's public domain data, but maybe they want to produce their own products around it. In my view, that's anti-competitive, but I don't work for the Department of Justice, so that's someone else's thing. But yeah, so sourcing data is an issue. There's issues around privacy and all that. So being compliant with GDPR, lots of issues around sourcing. But then in terms of processing the data and structuring it and storing it, there's lots of things to do. So sometimes the data is just messy and it needs to be classified. So I mentioned classifying occupations, companies, seniority levels, skills, work activities. All of that requires like a lot of statistical models and large language models. There's also various biases in the data. There's sampling bias, there's lags in reporting. All of these need a lot of statistical machinery to make sure we're ultimately presenting data that is unbiased. And there's always improvements to make on these models. That has to be owned and maintained. Then there's also structuring this data in a way that is not too computationally intensive or too storage intensive. So we have this dashboard that has a lot of flexibility, and we want to filter by things like keywords or skills or whatever. And a lot of dashboards are built on pre-aggregating data, and they can run on a SQL backend, and that's not feasible for something for data of this magnitude. So we really need to basically run pipelines on the fly, which are more compute intensive. And in order to do that efficiently, we can't use something like SQL or Python. We have to use more like low-level, fast programming languages. So we have to build our own pipelines and like Go and Rust and stuff like that. And then there's the infrastructure that it's stored on. Do we want to run this on AWS, or do we want to run it on our own hardware or something? So we have a lot of like infrastructure considerations as well. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about being able to query information flexibly, easily. So all that complexity, we think that's our problem, not the user's problem.
And before, say your obsession with data, you started your journey in a university.
Yeah.
Could you tell me a little bit about that? Why university? Why a motivation to teach?
Yeah. So I'm a recovering academic, as they say. Yeah. I mean, I think I was really drawn to. So I did my PhD in economics, and I really, I mean, I love economics. It's the first economics class I took, I felt like I was walking into a new country and already understood the language. That was the kind of vibe. I was like, oh, this is how I already think. I can't believe there's a discipline for this. And it was, it's exciting. The questions are interesting. The methodology is fascinating. And I also like teaching. I mean, I still teach. I teach the future of work at New York University, and it's great. I mean, I enjoy it. I think it's a way to get connected to the kind of deep thoughts about a domain. And still, I feel like even now that I've been out of real academia for so many years, I still feel like my real heroes are academics. I mean, there's an expression where I forgot who said it, but they said, if you want to know who you are, think about who your heroes are. And I still think I look up to academics, and I think of myself as like really kind of an academic economist, like in my soul. Um, so I think I
And
was really drawn to that. What?
what do you think is the main difference between when you say you look up to people in academia? What do you think is the main difference between people who are in academia and the people who've kind of had early success without having to like dropouts, let's say, who've haven't even completed their academia?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're an academic, if you're doing academic research, you are at the cutting edge of a domain. You are at the frontier of science. And I mean, if you're good, then you're at the frontier of science. I mean, there's plenty of people who don't quite get there, but you're at least on the journey to be advancing our understanding of the world. And that is, I think, just a noble pursuit. And there's lots of noble pursuits that are not that. Of course, like, there's ways to contribute to the world and contribute to your family, and like through more just different means, or different channels. So I think there's something unique about being an academic, in that you're yeah, I think you're just trying to push the boundaries of science, and that's just something that I happen to be drawn toward. But and I think it's unique. But what I think is where I think I sort of deviate from that identity, is that I think in academia, I mean, I'm going to say this in a kind of negative way. I don't mean it to be as negative. So, however I say it, like, cut it down by 50%, in your mind. But like I think we're sold this myth that the way to advance a science is through academic channels, through this very specific channel of like publication and peer review. And that is, I think, just not true. Like, there are other ways to advance a science. And going back to what you were saying about Mike Bloomberg, like, this is someone who advanced the science of financial markets. Now, he didn't do it in the same way as Gene Fama, or or Harry Markowitz, or other like academic researchers who advanced the field of finance. He did it through a commercial channel, and by creating ubiquity of data and products around analyzing finance. And I think and that has been very effective. We've had academics and practitioners in financial markets, and I think we have not had that in labor markets. There are plenty of labor economists in academia, and I don't think the world has a Mike Bloomberg of labor markets. I mean, hopefully we can get there, but I mean, but I think we need that. I think we need more practitioners advancing the field of labor markets through products, and through platforms, and through things that scale differently, and I would argue better than research.
And at the same time, I think there is a question of financing, because if you are exploring the cutting edge of any domain, while at the same time building up revenue, you can always invest so much more into the fields that you specifically find more lucrative or interesting for
Yeah.
yourself, without having to rely on external funding to
Yeah,
keep you going.
totally. I mean, there's a real tension there, at least like conceptually. So, if you're not constrained by the profit motive, then you can pursue interests that have more positive externalities and all that. I think in this domain of labor markets, I actually think there's not a lot of tension. Like, I think you can advance science and also do things that have commercial value. I don't think it's I don't think that's always the case, but I happen to think there's enough ways to make money that also involve like good high quality research. I mean, maybe we're in a unique time, maybe we're in a unique market, but I think there's plenty of commercial opportunity, and plenty of good foundationally interesting work to do. And so there's a big intersection between those two priorities.
What is always motivated you? And has your motivation changed over time?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it has changed over time. I mean, I think as I think when I was yeah, it's a really interesting question. I'll give you a little anecdote that I think when I was younger in like high school and like early days of college, um, I wanted to do things that I enjoyed that would like make money, um, and you know, and like have a family and all that, and I still really want to do all those things. Those are important priorities, and I feel like I'm mostly doing those things. Um, but I think I kind of got the itch to like build something more and just do something that would impact the world somehow. So
When did that happen?
I don't really know, but I remember at one point, my dad, my dad was a statistician, and I didn't really know that until I kind of became a statistician, and then I was like, oh, that's what you do. Oh, that's funny, so yeah, I didn't really know that at a time, but I remember one time he said something along, I don't remember exactly, but he said something along the lines of working with math and numbers is a great profession because so many people hate it. And he was like, if you could do, if you don't mind doing something that other people don't like, then you could make money that way. And I remember hearing that and thinking like, yeah, no, like it's an interesting point. Like, sure, like if you do something that other people don't like, there's like some compensating differentials, like you get compensated for that. But I was also like, it's a little bit of a narrow way to view your occupational choice. Like we are, you know, what we do in our job is kind of what we do with our life. Like this takes 80,000 hours of our
Yeah.
life, and that's just really important. Sometimes I get annoyed when people say, like there's this pushback against people asking, "What do you do?" Like you meet someone and you say, "What do you do?" And sometimes you'll hear people say like, "Oh, come on, like get real," like, but I don't know. Like I think it's a really important question. Like this is how we spend our days. Like this is how we spend our time, and we should want to talk about it and be proud of it. And this is
Because we
like,
assume that most of the people, when thinking about what to spend at least 33% of their life doing, they would choose something that they like or enjoy or would want to
yeah,
talk about.
yeah, exactly. So, something that they enjoy, something that lights them up, that they're passionate about, but also it's an opportunity to like build something lasting. And most people, I think, do build things with their careers, even if they don't realize it. Like you could work as a, staff, engineer at some firm or whatever, but like you're actually building things that other people will build on, and you're creating goods and services for the economy. And those are things that people use. And we're all part of building something that other people use and enjoy. And I think that's happening whether people realize it or not. But I think when you do start thinking about it that way, it's kind of empowering. Like you think, oh well, like I'm going to be allocating a third of my life or whatever it is to building something. So what do I want to build? Like what do I want the world to have when I die? And that's, I think, just a kind of fun way to think about our career. And I don't know, I like thinking about it that way. Yeah, it feels empowering.
And has your experience at IBM affected your vision of the world? Because I think that was your first kind of experience of what is happening on a very large scale at a large technology company, which I think at that time they were massively focusing on data science and building smart cities, integrating data.
Yeah, worked on a handful of those projects. Yeah, okay. So at IBM, they had, I think, 400,000 people at the time, and I was so surprised by how hard it was to get anything done. It
Why so?
was Yeah, I mean, so like in economics, sometimes we see a production function where, the production function is basically the relationship between, inputs and outputs. You could think of it like, quantity of labor or capital on the x-axis, and like, your amount of goods and services that you produce on the y-axis. And it looks like an S shape where, there's this inflection point where you get like increasing returns to scale. The bigger you get, the more efficient you get. And that always like made a lot of sense to me. Like there, of course, returns to scale, you get better distribution and specialization and all that. And then it starts to get concave, and then it starts to taper off.
Diminishing.
Yeah, you get diminishing returns to scale, and like that kind of makes sense, I guess. Like, the concept of diminishing returns to scale is like, it's an intuitive enough concept, but like not as intuitive as increasing returns to scale, I thought. And then sometimes in these diagrams, you would see like this actual drop where you would see actual quantity go down, like output go down as outputs went up. And that was like a model that we'd see in like textbooks, and and in the actual data. And it just never made sense to me. I was like, what is this? Like, how could you actually get like less productive as you scale? And I think the cartoon examples, like you have this factory where everyone's like bumping into each other, and like they can't get anything done because there's just like congestion. And I thought that was like such a silly, weird way to view the world. But after being at IBM, it actually started to click. I was like, oh, actually, like there, like by having so much scale, it actually creates a lot of friction. So there's like, managers on managers on managers on managers, like, and then at the very bottom of this pyramid, you have like a few people actually doing work. And, with every layer of management, there's communication friction, there's principal agent problems, there's incentive misalignment, and there's like coordination failure, and there's like territorialism, and it just, it becomes very, very hard to make any progress in a place where, any idea can be squashed by some executive who's in a bad mood. And like that environment is just difficult. Now I understand there's like benefits to that sort of scale as well, and at some point, you have to initiate some sort of like, you have to adopt some sort of proceduralism and bureaucracy, and that like, creates some room for specialization and all that. But I started to get a little bit more pessimistic about where the state of the economy was. I expected coming from academia, part of the reason why I went to go work in the private sector was like, all right, I'm an economist. I should see how goods and services get made in the real world. Like I've never actually seen stuff get made. And like, it would be great to see how like, a big, successful company like IBM makes stuff. And after being there, I was like, wow, they're like really
Slow.
not super efficient. Like they're slow. And yeah, it just made me think like, even though it's like a little discouraging on the one hand, it also made me kind of optimistic because, there's a lot more to build. I was once getting lunch with Eric Brynjolfsson, who's an academic researcher. He does a lot of research on the future of work. And, he was talking about like, some conversations he was having with executives at consulting firms, and how they were worried about automation. And then he was kind of, he kind of just put this idea out there, and he's like, yeah, does anyone actually think that we like are, have made all the stuff that we want to make? And like, of course not. And it just made me think, yeah, like there's so much to do. Even at IBM, like a huge, massive company, like there was so many projects that like, we'd love to do with more resources and just could not do. And so that thinking kind of started shaping the way that I think about like economic output in general, that, supply creates its own demand. Like our economic output is constrained by how productive we can be. And it's not like, we're not going to run out of stuff to do. We're not going to run out of things to make. And I think it just, made me kind of hopeful about what you can do as a startup. Like just work on hard problems that other people aren't working on, and like there you go. That's all you need to do. Like the rest is commentary.
And why do you think large companies don't just simply create spin-off startups? Instead of with having so much stuff to do, instead of scaling their workforce, which will make them even more inefficient if we're talking about the diminished returns on the number of people you have, why don't they just create innovation labs with like 10 people each and just do it that way?
It's a good question. I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I mean, I think, yeah. I mean, one way to think about that is that you know if you're someone who is drawn toward working on an innovation lab, you and maybe there is an option to do that at a company, but there's also an option to do that outside of a company. You could also quit and start another company, and there's a lot of upsides to doing this outside the walls of a company. Like you get a lot more of the upside, you get more of the autonomy. You don't have to be you know
You experience
yeah.
the joys of fundraising and rejection.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. That's a plus. If you ever want to be totally bullied. So yeah, maybe you want to see how much abuse you can take. So that, but even so, like there's an excitement to doing something on your own. Now, you know, that's risky, and not everyone can tolerate that kind of risk, which I also totally get. But I kind of think the pros outweigh the cons for someone who's very entrepreneurial, which makes me think that the best incubation spaces, the best ways to incubate are probably outside of a real company. Like they probably get the best people. Um, there's also a tendency for companies to I don't generally buy into this idea that companies are super short termist, but there is a short termism that can come into play. If you're working on something and it's not paying off fast enough, that could just get cut, and that's just a risk that people may not want to tolerate. It's also very difficult to spin off a company. Um, if a company gets incubated in a large entity, and then they still own a meaningful percentage of it, like it's going to be hard to find an investor who's gonna really want that overhang,
Yeah.
on the cap table. So I don't know. I think there's like plenty of inefficiencies, relative to other startups. Having said all that, I do think it's an underutilized um, approach. Like I do think more companies should be creating, sort of incubated labs, or at least some experimental groups that are kind of protected from the general, bureaucracy and structure of the big organization.
And with you probably get asked this question a lot because most of us humans without the data, we're looking at all of those news about AI taking over jobs, with Sorrow releasing the Hollywood. Is like my friends in Hollywood are thinking like, whoa, what is this gonna do? We're gonna have
Yeah.
so much content, so many movies. With you being able to see the actual data of how AI is affecting the world, if you correlate it to the data past 2.5 years, going maybe 2 years back, what are the main shifts that you are seeing? And is this making you more optimistic or pessimistic as to the future of labor markets?
Yeah. It's a really, really big question. I mean, there's like some sub questions in there. So let me kind of, yeah. First, I mean, I'll tell you how I kind of think about like technology affecting work generally, and just like specifically as it relates to like displacement of human workers. I mean, one way to think about this is that you can have there's some speed at which technology gets adopted from firms. So firms adopt technology, and like and they represent the demand of the demand side of labor markets. Like firms hire workers, and that takes some time. There's some adoption lag, and we're seeing adoption, but it's not so fast. Like it takes time for firms to adopt technology because they're procedural and because they're bureaucratic and like all these things. So like there's some adjustment period where we can like breathe. There's also some time it takes for people to select into what kind of occupations they want to be. So on the supply side of the labor market, it takes time. There's some lag in when people choose what they want to be and when they actually enter the labor force. So if someone could just like switch occupations on a dime, then we're relatively protected. But it doesn't always work that way. So I think a big question is like, how responsive are labor markets to technological displacement? Like, can workers just like reorient themselves, or does it take time? Like if lawyers get displaced, are all the lawyers just going to become like I don't know, like whatever's remaining, psychologists, let's say. So probably not. But that's a big question that I like pay attention to. So one is like the responsiveness of firms. How reactive are they? Like, can they react quickly or slowly? How responsive is the supply side? How responsive are workers? Can they be fast or slow? And then there's a third part, which I think is kind of the most important one in my mind. And that's really the question of like, how quickly can jobs reconfigure? So, sometimes I think the lazy way to think about, AI, displacing workers is to think about workers as, being in occupations and AI displacing occupations wholesale. But that's not how it works. Occupations don't get automated wholesale. They just, there's like very few cases in history where that's been true. Now you can make the case that like switchboard operators, were displaced with like, in a moment, but like nothing else really works that way. So, so more often you have jobs changing, you have jobs reconfiguring. So, technology usually automates tasks and components of work. And those, and a job is a collection of tasks. It's a bundle of work activities. And that bundle changes. And the way that changes is, I think, kind of an open question. Like, I think that's one of the most important unanswered questions in labor economics. Like, what actually determines the work that people do in their jobs? There's so many people that I think, I know personally, I'm sure you know personally, where they start a job and they think it's one thing, and then it turns out to be something else. Their actual day-to-day looks really different. And so, and I think that depends partially on the technology, but partially on the organization as the organizing unit of labor. Is it the type of organization where you're hired into a very like, predetermined set of rigid tasks? Or are you hired into a role where your job is to do whatever is useful to do and, and have that reconfigure all the time? I mean, at Revelio Labs, we're a small company. We're only like 70 people, but it's, it's very adaptive. Like sometimes we'll get a client request, which is a new thing, and we'll have to say, who's got the bandwidth? Like who could do this? Who's got the skills? Who's got the interest? And we're like, that's my job. I'm constantly like thinking about like how to reconfigure people's work. Maybe someone quits and we have to think, oh, who can take that on? Maybe someone says, oh, I'm not interested in this anymore. We have to like adapt. And, we just have to constantly reconfigure people's jobs to match the needs of the organization, which are evolving every day. And that has nothing to do with technology. That's just the day-to-day, fluidity of being in a company with changing demands. And technology is like a secular shift. But if you're adaptive to begin with, then like actually that reconfiguration is not a big deal. You're like used to it. So I think I like to think about it through the lens of like job reconfiguration, conceptually. The tough thing is we don't have a lot of data on how jobs are reconfiguring, the task composition of jobs, and that's something I'm working on, and I got a book coming out on the topic. It's called Job Architecture. So that's a big question. It's about like how do we track the evolution of work, and how do we like structure our data such that we can measure these changes and track them in real time and adapt to these changes. So I think that's the big question for me. And I think if we had more visibility into how work is transforming, we'd be able to be more purposeful in how we adapt, and we'd be able to do workforce planning in better, smarter ways. So that these Hollywood studios, maybe they'll adopt Sora, and maybe be able to do some component of film or CGI or whatever, in a more automated, efficient way. But there's a lot to do to make a movie or make a show, and not all of it's going to be automated, immediately.
And just maybe if we become productive enough using all of those tools, that we can do all of the work productively within 3 days in a week, then we'll have more time to watch more films, which will be produced in larger quantities using AI tools in Hollywood.
There you go. It was in 1930, John Maynard Keynes wrote this article called "Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren," and the point of that article was to predict what would be possible in 100 years. And he wrote that in 1930. So we're not that far from 2030. Like we're almost, it's right around the corner. And one of his predictions was that we'll see a kind of 2-day work week. That we'll just, we'll live a life of leisure. That was the main overarching prediction. Mm-hmm. That, we'll be in this time of such prosperity that people won't need to work so much. And we will just, live a life of leisure and, appreciation of the arts and stuff like that. And, that's not, now that we're closer to 2030, I don't think we're going to see it quite that way. So, he was wrong in some ways. In most ways he was wrong, but there are some indications that, he might've been partially right. I think work now involves more leisure. Like now leisure and work are more blended than they've ever been. It's not like we do backbreaking labor and then we go home and enjoy ourselves. We enjoy ourselves at work. I mean, right now, we're recording a podcast. This is fun. Like, I think this is the type of thing that, would have been considered leisure not so long ago, but now we're doing it as part of work. So I think that's worth pointing out. And, we do see kind of more pushes for a 4-day work week. Those haven't really panned out, but it's, it got some legs as a movement. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I think, it's easy to kind of scoff at the prediction because it clearly didn't come true. But
100 years.
I think it's, what?
100 years time frame. Like, it's not easy to make those kind of predictions.
Yeah, it's hard enough to predict tomorrow. So, we got to cut him some slack. But either way, I think there's like some wisdom there.
And can we talk a bit about your experience as a CEO? Because this is the point where I hear just so many different opinions, experiences, and I tend to lean that there is a frame of mind that we need to have as effective CEOs. Because there are those that treat their company as, it's a family. We're a family here. Mm-hmm. And there are those that just, we're a machine that needs to get the work done. There are CEOs that suffer from trying to be nice and trying to be seen as nice. How did you navigate your path in SEO? What were the main lessons, mistakes that you've noticed yourself make and learn throughout the years?
Yeah, there's no shortage of mistakes. So and hard lessons. I don't know. You know the expression that every general is fighting the last war. So I sometimes feel that way. That I think a lot of the way I've thought about building Revelio Labs is a reaction to my experience at IBM, where everything was very hierarchical and there was a lot of management. And at Revelio, we don't have product managers or project managers. Everyone's hands-on. We are a hands-on company. There's really no layers of management. And I think that is, I think that's a choice, and it's hard to optimize around that paradigm, but we're trying to optimize around that paradigm. And, part of that, part of the analog there is that, also a reaction to being in a big company is that, standards are really high at Revalio. We want it to feel like a high performing team and have really high standards for performance. And I think that creates an excitement in a way. People like being part of an elite team. The best people want to work with the best people. And if you can create an environment where standards are really high, then that attracts the right people, the types of people that also don't need management. The people that take initiative and take pride in their work, and keep motivating each other and pushing each other forward.
How do you filter for those kind of people?
What?
How do you filter for those kind of people in interviews or selection process?
It's really hard. I mean, I don't know. Interviews are in general. There's so much error. Like there's so much you can't filter for. I think we really do the best filtering after someone's at the company. I mean, I wish we did better filtering, during interviews. And we've gotten better at it. But, I think just parting ways with someone who's not quite there is sometimes the move you have to make.
How difficult it is for you to make the move?
How difficult is it for me personally to let go of someone? Not as difficult as it used to be. So I think I've, become a little bit more of an asshole perhaps. But I mean, I don't know. Like, I think I've been like relatively transparent about it. So I think we've gotten to a point where if it's not working out, it's no longer a surprise. And I don't think people take it as a surprise. So, it happens. And I think it's just part of the company culture that I think people just understand. So, I don't, of course, like, we do it as respectfully as possible. There's no like real, it's less difficult. I mean, in the past we used to flub this all the time. It would be, without proper warning or, it would be like, done in a reactive way or, like, I think we had to learn how to be,
Fair.
kind, friendly people, but also, keep expectations high. So that's been like a work in progress. I mean, that's, and then during interviews, I mean, I think the fact that people know that we'll kind of pull the trigger on ending things if it's not working out has made everyone else who interviews, I think, more discriminating, like they tend to be, keep standards high then also because they don't, want to have to end things with someone who's perfectly nice. So, I think that is like always difficult, but has to be done.
Because I believe for a good CEO, it's a constant work on yourself. It's admitting to yourself that you are sometimes a little bit of an asshole. but sometimes you have to be, to make sure that you can stand up for what you really think is the right thing to do for the company. And because internally you might want to be likable, that everybody likes me, I'm a nice guy. But in reality, that's not the best thing for the business to have a CEO who has problem being assertive in certain ways, or making tough
Yeah,
decisions, right?
yeah. Sometimes, I mean, like I think, if we can like, y- you know, identify the reason for being assertive and justify, you know, being perhaps assertive or aggressive, that is at least, I think we get a pass. Like there's an example that just happened a few weeks ago. We were at a conference, and right before there was someone who we collaborated on an article with, and then he went to go work for a competitor, and basically, like published this research as kind of his own work, even though it was kind of a replication of our work, and I think I was like upset about it, as someone who's kind of pseudo academic, and I like to think of
To be cited.
academics. Yeah, I think of like academic expectations and standards as just something that deserves some kind of respect. But I think had to basically call him out and like tell him like, hey, we're really not happy about this, and like I think this is not cool, and it's like like I don't appreciate it. That was like I had to
Yeah.
get aggressive, but really it was like it's not that I really give a shit about like getting attribution. Like who cares? It's like the actual practical manifestations don't really matter. But I felt like you know as a CEO of a company, I got to protect my team. Like there are people that worked on this, and like if I'm not going to stand up for them, then how can I like look myself in the mirror and like pretend to lead this team? Like you got people, you got mouths to feed, you got people who like rely on you to represent them and make sure that they
Mm.
make the most out of their careers and their reputations. So
And
I
the
don't know, I
same,
guess I felt like I had to like get out there and say like,
show the
hey,
muscle.
you're yeah, I guess yeah, even though like this you
Because
know
the saying that I really like is, it's better to be a samurai in the garden than a gardener at war.
wait, sorry, say that again, what do you mean?
It's better to be a samurai in a garden than a gardener at war. And it's about
Interesting, yeah.
embracing your inner aggression, even when you just knowing that you have that capability, that energy to defend your team, your company, your vision, what's right when you need to.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean they have to be an asshole all the time, but it's having that capability and knowing that you have that capacity and you have access to it when you need to. It's just like,
Yeah, yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think there's something to be said for that. I mean, like they're sometimes like getting having a reputation as like a little bit of a hothead is like not a good reputation. Like you don't want to be like someone that's going to fly off the handle or something. But you know, I guess like setting that boundary, like setting a line and saying like here's like someone can we can snap if someone crosses that line is like probably a good thing that people know exists. So I yeah, I hear you.
because I would always think about as the very like side of this, as the very critical side is like Steve Jobs, when people were afraid to get into an elevator with him because he would ask a question,
Yeah.
if he didn't like your answer, you'd be fired. But at the same time, this allowed him to move things at such a speed without being okay with mediocrity. He would always demand excellence and have that kind of speed of things running around him. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's yeah, like I wouldn't go so far as to say that like there's necessarily like really high returns to like being a kind of piece of shit at work. Like I think there's some CEOs who like, manage like tyrants, and they are just like, you're not going home until this is done. And like, they it's like that can be toxic. And I think there, sometimes that gets romanticized. I mean, like having high expectations, I think is really important. And sometimes there's no nice, friendly way to say that. So I, for sure, like there's a spectrum here. But I also don't think there's such a tension in being, kind of a like person that others do want to work with
Mentor.
and do want to get into an elevator with, and also, being able to propel things forward. I mean, sometimes, I think there are some people on my team who I think sometimes if I call them, and I'll always call people randomly throughout the day, but I think sometimes I'll call them, and maybe they'll, sometimes the conversation will end with being like, oof, yeah, we got a lot to do, like, all right, I got a lot on my plate. And sometimes the conversation will end with like some, with both of us feeling energized. Sometimes we'll talk about ideas, we'll diagnose like what's going on, we'll like brainstorm. And then at the end, I think we'll both feel excited about like, oh, this could be really awesome if we get there, if we do this, and we'll both kind of want to like move faster and do things better, faster. So yeah, I don't know. It's hard to motivate people generally.
Mhm.
Um,
But
and
it's
yeah,
something that you feel like you have to get good at to be a good leader, kind of to be a mentor and motivator.
I do think so. Yeah, I do think that it's very, yeah, it would be very hard to run a business without being able to motivate people somewhat. Now, I don't think you necessarily have to be this like inspirational visionary, but yeah, I mean,
The Tony
yeah,
Robbins embrace.
yeah, exactly. Like, I don't think that, you can still be like a practical, normal person, but I think it would be very difficult to build something impressive if if you if you weren't able to you know get people to perform well. And I think the most productive people want to perform at their best, and so I think they're also drawn toward people who can identify like what makes their work really good and point that out, and like you know get them excited about problems that they might be less excited about if you hadn't had that conversation. So sometimes I think just like getting into the weeds with someone and talking about things that they want to nerd out about is motivating. Like we have someone on the team who's really into distributed systems. And like I don't know anything about distributed systems, but like, you know, he was like all excited about this, and I read a book on distributed systems, and like it wasn't that hard. I don't know. It was like an audiobook. I finished it in a couple of weeks, and then and now I'm like able to have a conversation with this guy and like talk about like how these systems work. And like I think just being able to have these conversations, you know, allows him to feel like, oh, I'm doing something that's appreciated, and that is sometimes just all it takes.
I can just imagine. I think it would mean a lot for people when they know that their leader boss would take some time to learn in depth about what they're doing to be able to talk to them to be sure that they're valued. I think that already speaks a lot about your approach when it comes to leading. I think. And what are you personally most excited about looking into the future now?
Yeah, I mean so much. I'm excited for I'm excited for labor markets, honestly. I mean, now we're in a little bit of a dark time in the U.S. where, like, labor markets are kind of dissolving before our eyes. But I mean, all the like, everything that's happening, in current events aside, I think we're on this long path where labor markets are really getting the attention they deserve and getting more efficient and scientific. And I think that's just so exciting. And I feel like, I want to be part of it. Like, I think that's kind of, that was an original motivation for starting the company. I felt like, this is a field that is advancing and becoming more scientific, more rigorous. And, I want to do whatever I can to help get it there. And I think we're doing what we can. We're like building as much as we can, as fast as we can, as well as we can. And I think it's helping. Like, I really do feel good about what we're putting out into the world. I think we're able to structure labor market data in ways that it hasn't been able to be structured. I think we're able to, derive insights about, the effect of AI or the labor market health, or like how companies differ from their competitors and what they're doing. I think these are important questions. And I think, they're in the weeds and they require a lot of hard work, but I feel like we're entering a world where those types of questions get appreciated more.
And how are you personally making use of AI in your day-to-day?
In like personal life or like in work?
Yeah, and personal. Well, I think it's both. Really.
Yeah. I mean, so in work, we're using it for summarization, for labeling, for like, parsing, for so many parts of the data, life cycle, can benefit from generative AI. And we really started this company like in the early days of large language models.
Yeah.
We were built on Word2Vec right when it came out. This was like the first large language model. And now, we're able to be built on transformers and now like, what's coming out from the generative models. So I think we've been able to piggyback on those advances in a way that's just exciting. It gets us to be more efficient and be able to do cooler things. In personal life, I don't know, I use it for I use it all the time. I use it for like, recipes and like, business strategy and like generating, pictures of unicorns for my kids and like, just silly things, even just like, ranking, movies that are like age appropriate for like my 4-year-old daughter. Like these are things that are just, it's so useful for stuff like that. And yeah, just anytime something comes up, yeah, it's like, that's what I turn to. I'm always on ChatGPT or DeepSeek or Claude or any of these things, and it's great. So it's just making life a little easier.
And to finalize, what advice would you give to yourself, to you before maybe even getting to work at IBM, with everything that you know now and you've learned about the industry, the labor markets, starting a company?
Wow, it's a good question. I mean, one thing that I would stress is that, it takes a long, like I think business is like in important ways like a relationship game. And you gotta, build relationships, build a reputation, get to be known in communities, surround yourself with people who you want to learn from. And that takes a long time. It's never, so, like when we started selling data into financial services, we went to a conference one year and people were like, "Who are you? What do you do?" And, they're like, "Okay, I'll probably never see you again." Then, we saw them next year and they were like, "Oh yeah, I remember you." And then the next year they were like, "Oh, okay, so you're here to stay. Like now we can like be friends," And that's like, that takes years, and like, it's I'd say being deliberate on like how you construct your network, I think is really important. Yeah, I would also, I mean, there's so many things I would have liked to have known. I mean, even just like, how to consume information effectively, like, being able to kind of talk the talk, get to know the problems, consuming podcasts is like one thing that I didn't used to do, and now is like a huge part of like the way I sort of stay in the know about something. And yeah, I mean, there's so many things like that I think could just make, would have made me like more productive, get a head start. So all of that.
And maybe if you can just finally focus on when you say constructing your networks, maybe you can give a bit more details into how to go about it.
Yeah. So I once heard a definition of community as, you could define community as where you keep showing up. And I like that definition because it's so simple, but it also just is so like is actually practical. Like, okay, if you want to be part of a community, just keep showing up where these people show up. Like go to their, seminars or conferences, or go to their like, you know, I don't know, like, find a find a community that you want to be part of and show up where they show up. And that's it. It's pretty simple, I think.
Just do simple things. I think that's one of the best advices that
Yeah.
I've heard. In order to build something lasting and successful, you have to be okay with doing boring, simple things for an extended period of time. That's
Yeah,
cool.
hey, you got to grind, That's
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me today, for sharing so much. And I wish you all the best with Revalio.
Thank
I'll
you.
be waiting for the release of your book. Hopefully, it's going to come soon.
Thank you. Yeah, it's release date is January 13th.
January. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be incredibly interesting for anyone who's listening to follow Ben and to stay in the loop of what the labor markets are going to be looking like every quarter, like starting, because I think this is one of the most important and exciting topics right now, to be able to prepare, to be able to see things in advance, and to make the right moves that will keep you on top of the wave.
Sounds
Thanks
good.
so
Thank
much.
you.